Welcome back to another episode of Political by Design. I'm your host, Clarke, and I'm joined by Mark and Denis, co-hosts of the podcast Your Internet Boyfriends. I absolutely love the name, by the way. Your newest mini-series, I think it is called, breaks with your usual content. Mm-hmm. And I think the idea was, after you watched Russell T. Davies's Tiptoe, you basically came up with the question, could this actually happen? And your mini series explores this. So before I ask you loads of questions around that, and why you feel this is now the right time to ask this question, I'd love to ask you about your personal journeys. Mark and Denis, who are you?
Mm-hmm. I'll start. Hello. So I'm Mark. I have this podcast with Denis Lane. We are. I'm a homosexual. Denis is a heterosexual, and we're both beautiful Irish comedians. My background is comedy, cabaret more so. So, I kind of came up through Dublin cabaret, kind of drag cabaret comedy scene, play piano, storytelling, and comedy. But I also work a lot in kind of queer history and queer history, storytelling, and a bit of activism and politics. So it's all kind of come together in this little mini series. But generally comedy, podcasting, personality, famous gay. Yeah. My status that I'm trying to push. Very famous gay.
We love that. Dennis, what about you?
I am the straight part of Your Internet Boyfriends. I'm a stand-up comedian, same as Mark. Moved from Ireland probably about 6 years ago now. I think Mark has about 4 years on me in London. And I became very good at that. And then I just became so good at it, I decided that I'd move to podcasting just to give everyone else a break. So I saw Mark do a show and I thought, oh, he's very good. So I decided to make a podcast. And like you said, it's been all fun and games, and it's been a good bit of nonsense every week, and it's one of my favorite things to do. But since we saw that series, we decided that we needed to get a little bit serious, because it felt like things were getting serious.
And I think this is obviously, I mean, Tiptoe's the most talked about thing, I think, in my circles at least. People simply won't shut up about it, and quite rightly so, because it is striking. And we live in, I think, I always say, after, being a homosexual in the 2010s, where I feel this decade was all about, well, the only way was up, wasn't it? Same-sex marriage, the Equality Act, equality, LGBTQ equality progressing all over Europe. This time is a very different time now. So your core question, could this actually happen, is quite interesting to me. What inspired you to ask this question now?
I think we watched the show separately. We didn't actually talk about it. It came at us like everybody, and we both watched it for different reasons. And I think we were both floored by the show and by the end scene and the horror of it. And I think what's been interesting about our podcast is we're similar people, but we've come through slightly different lifestyles, and it's the conversation that we have between a queer person and a straight person every week of maybe highlighting how people don't fully realize how bad it has been getting. I think Denis is very aware, because he's surrounded by me telling him all the time, and we've loads of queer friends, and we're in a very diverse group, and we've we get it, we know what's happening, but there would be lots of people in our lives who would have no idea of how hostile it's becoming and what is potentially around the corner. So it's more, I think, talking to other people and how they almost dismiss the show as being a bit ridiculous and being a little bit too far-fetched, and like something like that would never happen.
I think it's something that you said, that where you said that, especially in my circle, referring to the gay community and stuff and like those communities. Whereas when I hear that, I'm like, there's no one on my side talking about Tiptoe. Now, obviously there are a few people, but in general, in my walk of life, I'm not going to get a WhatsApp from one of my friends saying, "Oh, hey, have you seen Tiptoe? It's great." Like I'll mention it to,
Mm,
very progressive people, but they'll be like, "Oh, what's that on?" I have no idea. It's just not that conversation isn't
mm,
happening, and I think it's almost coming. It's like, how do I say it? It's like you talk about the 2010s. I think there's from my side, people seem to believe like, oh, they're grand, they've everything sorted, they're on the up. Like we don't need to worry about that anymore because that's what was brought across us. It's like pride flags. Everyone, is able to come out now and get married, and it's all good. But there just seemed to be this kind of sinister, current happening in the last, 5 to 10 years, and it was honestly like not very nice to come to terms with it, because I'm like, I've become friends with so many more people that I normally wouldn't have been, and you're kind of thinking, oh, this really could be them, next, like, or they're experiencing
mm.
this and we're just pretending that it's not happening. And I suppose it's that kind of pretending that we wanted to kind of puncture in the series and actually have the conversation.
What I find interesting is, in a way, observing the reaction of our own community,
Mm,
which has been sort of, and I think you said, and is sort of coming to terms with the new reality, has been
Mm,
quite slow. We've been really slow in terms of building back our campaigning infrastructure, um, really slow in responding to what was coming our way. But I feel like we're starting to find our feet.
mm,
So I mean that sort of leads me to ask you both, because I think the timing of Tiptoe is quite interesting. How would you describe the political reality for LGBTQ people in the UK in 2026?
uh, dire. I think very. I think it's such a funny time of the year as well because it's Pride. So I just got back from Dublin. I was at Pride, Dublin Pride this weekend, and it's such a whirlwind because there's so much joy and excitement and the parade and the spectacle. And then I was just watching like clips on like RTE News. And this is Ireland, not the UK, but the comments under the clips, and we're back to this really nasty kind of criticism of Pride, um, and we have Pride in London coming up in a couple of days. So I think it's just the roller coaster of such joy and such acceptance and such visibility of queer people, and at the same time the hatred and the backlash growing at the same time. And I think politically we just all have to be very, very awake now over the next couple of years to what could potentially come and who comes into power and what they might do. So I think not to be too negative and like pessimistic, but I think it's mostly that, like you said, we're kind of building ourselves back up to start fighting again, which is great because I think we lost that for the last couple of years. We started to take the pressure off and started to assume that everything was going to be okay. So I'm very interested now to see Pride in London and Trans Pride in a few weeks. I think Trans Pride will be over 100,000 people this time. And I'd say
Oh,
even
really?
more than,
Goodness.
yeah, it was 100,000 last year, which is the largest Trans Pride event ever on earth. And I think this year it'll be even bigger because there's so many people who are conscious and want to help and want to get involved. So um, that's great. That's a good reaction that we're seeing people come back out and throw in their support. Yeah.
I just noticed, because I'm traveling around at the moment, as people can probably see that I'm inside in the car. But I've noticed that everything about Pride now has to be a little bit more subtle. So I was walking past a bookshop the other day in just this small little town, and I noticed on the windowsill that there was just a couple of authors, and I was like, "Oh, there's Stephen Fry, and there's Oscar Wilde," and I was like, "Oh, this is like a little Pride like section," but it didn't say it, and there was no colors. It was just like
Mm,
this one person's, little display that they put on their window, but they couldn't overtly say it anymore. And that is that is a dark kind of signal where it's like, what would it matter if they put some flags next to this? But they must be experiencing some backlash somewhere in their town or in their customers or somewhere to not overtly say this is a pride section, which seems like such a small thing, but it's like they must be receiving some sort of negativity. And I think when you're getting it into these small little tourist towns, it probably means it's politically changing quite massively.
Mm.
That, I mean, yes, absolutely, and it's so related, I think, to the news we've seen a few weeks ago about reform-controlled councils and the libraries, who are obviously also managed by the council, withdrawing pride displays, which is I think all wrapped up in a blanket of neutrality. But the question is, obviously, if you withdraw visibility, how neutral is this actually? On that note, Denis, I'd be really interested to hear, because I mean, you're coming from the perspective of an ally. So how do you with your friends and families, or when you stumble into or meet people who are, for whatever reason, believe pride is not needed anymore, what is your argument? Because in a way, I think you hear time and again, even from people who have only the best intentions, who say, "Oh, you know what? You've been doing this for such a long time now, and why don't you calm down? You've got your rights."
I mean, that's a big question, but it's actually funny because I can see Mark smiling on the other screen. There is that a couple of days ago, I did have one of these conversations with someone who is, just such a lovely person, incredibly progressive as well, in most lines of thinking. But then you come to something like that about pride, and it was you could hear the talking points come through them, and it seems that like these talking points have been just seeping into different, I mean, must be online, and it's kind of, it is what you're saying, Leslie, of like, oh, just get over it. It's not that big a deal. But I suppose the only thing I would say is that, okay, this isn't that big of a deal, right? Or what some people might have a problem with trans rights and trans people. And it's like saying, okay, like you think that's a bit too much, but it's like, wait until they start saying being gay is a bit too much. And then when they start moving on to another group and saying that's too much, when are you going to start actually sticking up for that? And when are you going to start? I think so many of the arguments that people have as well are stuck on such small little points, of like a news story of something bad, something incredibly bad. And what I'm trying to do here, like I'm pausing in what I'm talking about, because all of the things I'm thinking about are incredibly dark, and I don't want this to be too depressing. But I suppose if you're an ally and you really think you're an ally, I mean, maybe it's time to stop, like, to stop pulling at these tiny little threads of, but what if this and what if that, before it's too late, and actually just stick up for these people as people and just leave it at that. Because they're not listening on what I would say the other side. They're not listening to your nuance. They never have been. They're not listening to you getting the words correct. There's just a lot of hate. And if you don't get in front of this machine that's causing all this hate, then a lot of your friends are going to have a really rough time in the years to come.
I couldn't agree more. Before we sort of take a step back and talk about your miniseries and your podcast, I'd like to get one more sort of general question in, which I think fits the issues we talked about quite well. I mean, when we say the LGBTQ community, or I tend to say communities, because that's also true. We are actually communities, or different communities under the rainbow umbrella. We sometimes forget about what I feel. I don't have any numbers, but it feels like a growing cohort of people And I'm talking about the gay, lesbian, and bisexual people who actually say pride is not for me. Actually, I also wouldn't identify as left-leaning. I couldn't care less about same-sex marriage and all of that. Just leave me alone. Get on with my life. So obviously, those people feel more comfortable with the current development or regressive policies by far-right politicians or the US government, which is basically the same thing these days. So what would you say to those people? Because obviously, I mean, they are still gay, lesbian, bisexual people, and should be feel part of our community. So what would you say to those?
I've lots to say.
Oh, okay. Here we go.
And I say it every week because one of my jobs is I give queer history tours of Soho.
Ooh.
And I have this exact conversation every single week where I don't want to generalize, but there will often be members of our community who would like to remove themselves from these issues and would like to I guess it's coming from a place of trying to protect themselves in the future when we're heading into pretty hostile times. And I think there's some, and often, not always, but often cis gay men who have made a decision, it seems, that if I behave a certain way, I might be spared. I think this is the feeling I'm getting from some people. And if I can align my views and lean a little bit over to the right, then maybe I'll be protected in whatever might be coming. And it's not just about transphobia; it's a lot around racism, and there's an awful lot of very nasty views kind of settling into some of the LGBT community. I think it's such a shame. I think you don't have to be a trans person to believe that trans people should be looked after, the same as I'm not a person of color. It doesn't have anything to do with me, but I would like to think that people of color should be respected and should be treated nicely. You don't have to be part of the community to be on the side of trying to help people. It's a very, very worrying kind of issue at the moment. And it's not even around trans people either. It's a lot around women as well. I find there's a huge growth in misogyny. So like a really good example of this is I give a queer history tour. I talk for almost 2 hours about queer history, which is a huge amount of detail about gay men history, because so much of our information comes from court cases and execution trials. That we have thousands and thousands and thousands of stories about gay men's history. We don't have the same depth of history about women, just for endless reasons. But I feel it in the group when I start telling a story about a lesbian bar. People start rolling their eyes and looking at the floor and checking their phone. And there's a real kind of just lack of interest in other people from the community. So it's a real shame. I can see it worsening over the last couple of years as well. So, and I think in London especially, we're such a massive city. It's very, very easy to just surround yourself with people who are like you and who share your exact views. Compared to, I think, for example, in Dublin, where I was just there at the weekend, it's maybe not as extreme because it's a smaller place. So you're almost forced to, if you're a gay man, you're kind of forced to be friends with lesbians. You're forced to be friends with trans people because otherwise you'd have no friends. You have to have a bit of a wider pool. But in London, you could very easily have 20 people in your core friend group who are very, very, very similar to you. So it's a real shame. And I think, again, like Denis said, not to be taken for granted. We could be here talking in 5 years' time about marriage equality being reversed. That's not an outrageous kind of concept. That could very likely happen. So I think you kind of join in and buckle up, or you'll be left behind when the issues might shift over to affect you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So your day jobs, I think both of you are touring comedians. So this is in some way or not? I mean, really, this is actually a question. I don't want to assume anything. Did you feel this miniseries was a little bit off-brand, or and if so, was there like a risk attached to it, or was there like a risk attached to comedians talking about sort of deeply serious stuff?
Yeah, we started this call. I text Dennis before this. Oh yeah, go.
No, finish your thought.
I was just saying, just don't drive off the cliff. He's parked on a cliff on his holiday. But it's been very heavy the last couple of weeks doing the series, and then you record things that are heavy, and then you have to listen back to them and you have to edit them. And we were really worried that we were just getting very, very depressing, because we're usually just talking silly, like nonsense, just kind of dirt and a bit of filth, and
we love that.
Just we love that. But people have responded really well. They want, there's room to get into heavy topics now and then, and I think maybe you even listen better when it's someone that you've kind of come to be familiar with and you trust and you feel friendly with, as people do. When they listen to podcasts, they kind of feel like they're your friends. So if we're saying it and if we're taking the time to say it, then God, it must be important, because we often talk about nonsense. What were you saying, Dennis?
I do think that it was very off-brand for us, and it was definitely risky. And I don't think I've poured so much time over every little thing that we've said on the podcast series as much as I did with this one, just because I don't really care on week to week how we come across, because I can stand over everything that we do, right? We never go for low-hanging fruit. We're never punching down. It's always like just a bit of fun. But with this one, I really wanted to make sure that we were coming across the right way. And I felt that no matter how carefully we edited or we thought about it, we probably wouldn't please everyone in this one. But I also feel that I've had to maybe earn the trust of the community and communities, like you said. And so I felt that if we didn't speak on more serious issues when I'm engaging so much in a podcast with communities, it kind of wouldn't feel right. There must be times when we actually kind of say, okay, this is all really fun and stuff, but we now need to take a step back and kind of examine what's happening in these communities, because otherwise it would just feel a little bit fake. If they're this important to us week to week, then we should sometimes sit down and talk about these issues, right? But it definitely wasn't for everyone, and I don't think there's definitely people that didn't like it, because I know that our podcast as well is a form of escapism. So I felt maybe a little bit bad about that too, is that they're probably reading in the headlines every day and seeing stories every day that are probably making their world a little darker. But I felt like we just had to have the conversation.
That's an interesting point you touched on, because, whilst you sort of explain that, sort of part of your podcast is definitely, giving people a world to escape to almost, which is not always about politics or the dark stuff or the heavy stuff. I definitely do that. I listen to, which is quite ironic, because this podcast is all about politics. But I love listening to podcasts that are absolutely not related to politics and talk about the silly stuff, or sometimes about like I'm here for all the like ghosty paranormal podcasts, which is right up my street. Anyway, with this mini series, what would you like? What is there like something you'd like to achieve, a goal, something you'd like to get out of it?
I think, like Dennis was saying, I think you always have to be careful not to be just kind of hurtling trauma at people. So I think a lot of queer people are conscious of what's happening, and especially if they live in the UK, it's coming at them. But we have a huge audience of allies, straight people, who mightn't be so familiar. So I think if anyone just has listened and got a little bit of a shock about how important we feel this is and how we're giving it time, and they might go and read a few things. Like you can list off the statistics of hate crime figures and such, and people just have no idea. It's not really making the mainstream media. So I think if people just feel a little bit surprised, and they might go and do a little bit of reading and um, be aware, that's the first step. That's great. And then beyond that, get involved, like talk to family. And like we've all had, on the back of this, we've all had those conversations with friends and family who are, struggling to understand these topics. And often 10, 15 minutes talking to someone can really
Yeah,
show them the other side, and see it from a human perspective, and mention a friend that you have and maybe a situation that they've had to deal with, and it
Mhm.
starts to feel a bit more real. And it's easy to hate people that you don't know. I think that's the
totally. I
the
I
biggest
had
thing
the
we've
I
seen.
had the conversation with someone close to me, and it was actually easier to point them towards this series than to explain it to them to myself face to face. Because I was like, you know what, we're actually going to bring you through something on that series, which is well thought out and researched, and the series itself is, so well written and so well done. I was like, it'll actually be better for you if you, why don't you just go listen to our series first, and then come back and we'll have the conversation,
Mhm.
Yeah.
on these things that you have, because I felt like I couldn't. It's so hard, and it can get so exhausting to explain these
Mm,
things to people. It's so hard to talk against some of the talking points. So what I'm trying to say is, I think that the podcast could just be a good kind of almost starting point for conversations, and it's something that we can just have there to point people towards. Because the weirdest thing for me doing the series was we could read all the facts and figures, and you just don't. It doesn't sink in. You don't realize it. And there is a point in the series, I think in the second
mm,
episode, where I say to Mark, I'm talking about, we need to do this because, things are getting worse. And then I said some facts. And I was like, is this real? Is this actually real? Like what I'm saying into the microphone? Because sometimes when we're in the podcast
mm.
world, and our set is quite funny and it looks like a daytime TV show, and we're dressed like quite loud and big. And so we're kind of we're exaggerating stuff a little bit. But when I was talking about this, I just had this moment where I was like, oh no, I think this is getting worse. And so I think the goal of the podcast for me in this series, especially from the allies' point of view, is that people listening to this will realize, no, this is happening, and like we need to at least start thinking about it. So that would be my goal, is that they probably hit the same realization that I hit.
And you know what? I love that so much for a very specific reason, because I think we're just starting as LGBTQ people and allies to find our feet when it comes to storytelling. And, data and statistics and all of that doesn't really evoke emotions, does it? It's
Yeah.
just numbers on a piece of paper or your phone or something. I think there've been a few films and podcasts and books that really have changed my mind. And I just recently, or not changed my mind, sorry, but really sort of brought something closer to heart, and there are brilliant movies, shocking but brilliant, about the slavery period in the United States, obviously the whole Holocaust and
Mm,
all of that, and I think that plays such an important role to educate people. And I think podcasts, if it's a well-written mini-series, in your case it is, really does play a massive role in educating people.
Mm.
So I really hope this also inspires others to come
mm.
up with a piece of educational content that can sit there and, is available for everyone to just listen to and broaden their
Yeah.
horizon.
I think often talking about a community of people facing issues is very hard to process. But if you tell a story about one person and the issues that they face in their one specific life as an
Mm.
example, that can be much easier to process and try and understand. And I think you were saying about, all the other issues in the world. I think we're kind of at a bit of a turning point now, like we were 5 or 6 years ago with Black Lives Matter, and how people started to finally open their eyes as to how bad in this country and in America racism was, and people who would have, again, very confidently said, that's not a problem anymore, we're all equal, everyone has the same rights. And then it took those events and all of that movement to make us realize, actually, this needs a whole new, fresh set of eyes and attention. So I think we're kind of at that turning point now where there's still a lot of people need to just wake up and realize there's a problem, and then we'll get to see what we can do to fix it.
So that almost, I mean, I can't let you go without asking, can we expect more of this? Is this the end, or are you just warming up, gearing up to
So-
the
I think we're warming up. So we have our weekly series, which is kind of a review of our week, everything we've done, and we kind of touch on things we've watched or shows that we've been to or people we've met. But I feel like we will do this kind of go deep miniseries now and then when something important pops up and we think it needs a slightly different tone. And I hope people will start to kind of pick up on the tone and they'll realize, okay, now we're getting into it here, rather than just filling 5 minutes of the weekly show. So yeah, definitely, yeah. And it doesn't have to be TV. It could be going to a theatre show or reading a book, or something that happens, maybe going to a protest and spending an hour talking about the speeches that we heard.
I think it's just, it's almost like we have to do it, right? If we're engaging so much with the communities, if there are these moments that are having such cultural impact, or like these cultural warnings, then we should engage with them. But we've got a great team with us as well. Like Alistair James came in and like researched a lot of this for us and set this up for us. We've got Declan Kelly as well in the wings who produces stuff for us. So we've got a great team, and I think you can feel the motivation behind all of this as well. Like, it was so motivating to have so many people involved in this to say this is worthwhile and this is what we should be talking about. So I think week to week, myself and Mark can talk about our mad weeks that we've had, but I think it drives you on even more when you feel like you might make a tiny little difference to someone.
Amazing. Well, and lastly, please remind us, where can we find your podcast?
So it's called Your Internet Boyfriends. It comes out every Thursday on everything, Spotify, Apple, just yourinternetboyfriends.com. We also have bonus episodes, which are the complete opposite of everything we've just talked about. They are dirt. And there you can like subscribe. And this is like, because we have a problem now with our bloody parents have started listening. So we have bonus episodes that they don't know how to access. They don't know how to subscribe to that.
Leslie,
So we can get into like
every single week we finish recording and Mark goes, we have to stop talking about filth. And I'm like, okay, Mark, no problem. Let's stop talking about filth. And then the next week, Mark comes in and he goes, wait until you hear about all this filth. I'm like,
wait until you hear.
We can't get off this train.
Wait till you hear about this weekend, because I've been in Dublin with Declan, my producer, who is the other gay in the team. So the two of us took off. We left Denis on his holidays, and me and Declan went to Dublin, and there's HR issues. There's HR issues to be discussed after this weekend. So we need to figure that out next week.
So I assume this is almost like a teaser for next week's episode.
It's a teaser for me as well. I'm just finding out. So.
Oh my God, we got an exclusive. I love that. But I mean, I just on a silly note, before I let you drive on, Denis, and let you enjoy your day, Mark. I'm so glad Grindr stopped this "Hey Grindr" Madonna thing before. Oh my God! I mean, that was not okay.
She's still popping up though. There's still ads. Denis, you probably don't know this. Madonna paid for a big campaign with Grindr. Or Grindr paid her, I guess, to sponsor. I don't know who's paid.
Yeah.
I've seen
but
it.
they've sponsored. But every time you open the app, she's there. And then there was a time she started talking when you opened the app, so everyone knew that you were searching
Even
for her.
if your phone was on mute, She
Yeah.
just shouted at me like, "Can you not?"
That there's a lot of community members panicked there if they weren't meant to be on that app. But she's still there.
Absolutely.
The ads are still popping up. She's still going.
Someone needs to tell her to go away. Honestly, have a break, love.
That's you cancelled now. That's you done.
Oh dear. Well,
That's you dragged.
thank you so much both for your time.
Thank you.
And I really hope you will find thousands of open ears and minds with this new mini-series. And I hope we can talk again sometime soon.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye.